Chapter 8. No personal coming during the siege. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall shew great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth, behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Matthew 24:23-28. The disciples desired to know when the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple would take place. In answer to that question, Jesus first gave the preliminary signs in verses 4-14. Concerning these signs, he said, For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. The end would come only after the gospel of the kingdom had been preached for a witness to all nations. The actual sign of the destruction of Jerusalem was to be the gathering of the Roman armies round about her. Then the Christians were to flee without a moment of hesitation, for the great tribulation was about to take place. And as there had been false Christs and false prophets previous to the destruction of the city, so there would be the same during the siege. This is the prophecy of verses 23-26. The adverb then, which begins verse 23, marks precisely the point of time when false Christs and false prophets would appear, namely, when the siege was taking place. Christ had warned about those who would seek to deceive the people before the siege. Now he warns them against those who would be the deceivers during the time of the siege. The false Christs of verse 24 are not those of verse 5. In the midst of the terrible tribulation, many longed and prayed for the coming of the Messiah. There were those in Jerusalem who took advantage of the people's desire for their own ends. Josephus has recorded an incident showing how literally the Lord's words were fulfilled in this regard. He writes, The soldiers also came to the rest of the cloisters that were in the outer temple, whither the women and children, and a great mixed multitude of the people, fled, in number about 6,000. But before Caesar had determined anything about these people, or given the commander any orders relating to them, the soldiers were in such a rage, that they set that cloister on fire, by which means it came to pass that some of these were destroyed by throwing themselves down headlong, and some were burnt in the cloisters themselves. Nor did any one of them escape with his life. A false prophet was the occasion of these people's destruction, who had made a public proclamation in the city that very day, that God commanded them to get upon the temple, and that there they should receive miraculous signs of their deliverance. Now there was then a great number of false prophets suborned by the tyrants to impose on the people, who denounced this to them, that they should wait for deliverance from God, and this was in order to keep them from deserting, and that they might be buoyed up above fear and care by such hopes. Now a man that is in adversity does easily comply with such promises, from when such a seducer makes him believe that he shall be delivered from those miseries which oppress him, then it is that the patient is full of hopes of such his deliverance. Josephus records the extraordinary signs and wonders that appeared at the time. He writes of a star resembling a sword which stood over the city. A great light appeared for a half hour around the temple. Undoubtedly many of the signs were performed by false prophets under satanic power. These things added to the tribulation of a people who daily expected deliverance through the appearance of the Messiah. Christ stated definitely that during this tribulation he would not appear. In verses 23 and 26 he warns the disciples that if any man say, Lo, here is Christ, or there, they were not to believe it. Twice Jesus uses the expression, believe it not, and he pronounces it emphatically. Had the disciples been told that all the signs previously given were of a personal visible coming, then the declaration, Lo, here is Christ, or there, would not always signify a false Christ. Christ is speaking in this passage of an invisible, impersonal coming, a coming in judgment upon Jerusalem. The disciples were not to look for a deliverance by the personal coming of the Lord. Any rumor to the contrary would be untrue. Jesus said, Behold, I have told you before. In fine detail he had related to the disciples the preliminary signs, the actual sign, the terrible tribulation, and the appearance of false Christs and prophets during the tribulation. He had done this in order that they might not be deceived. The signs, events, wonders, false prophets, and messiahs were such that even the elect, if it were possible, could be deceived. Now they were forewarned. The personal coming of Christ. Not only were the disciples forewarned about false Christs, but Jesus informs them that when he does come a second time it will be no local event. It will be a universal coming seen by all. He says in verse 27, For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. This verse stands in contrast to the previous verses, for it speaks of Christ's second coming rather than his invisible coming in judgment upon Jerusalem. The disciples during the period of the siege were not to be deceived by anyone. When he comes the second time his coming will be as conspicuous as the lightning and will be witnessed by all men everywhere. From the east unto the west the coming of Christ will be seen. This means the entire world, not just Palestine. So conspicuous then will this personal coming of the Lord be that it will require no announcement. The idea of this verse is not the suddenness of his coming but the self-manifestation of it. No one will need to believe the testimonies of other persons that Christ has appeared, nor will there be press and radio reports announcing his arrival on the Mount of Olives or at the gates of Jerusalem. The whole implication of this verse is that Christ's second coming will be manifested in the heavens and not upon the earth. Verse 27, then, stands in contrast to the message of its immediate context, that is, the second coming is contrasted to the coming in divine judgment upon Jerusalem. It is profitable to note that Matthew uses the Greek parousia in this verse to express the thought of coming. So far as we know, parousia, when used in connection with Christ, refers to his second personal coming. Dr. Thayer states, in NTESP, of the advent, i.e., the future, visible, return from heaven of Jesus, the Messiah, to raise the dead, hold the last judgment, and set up formally and gloriously the kingdom of God, Thayer's Greek-English lexicon. It is also well to note that up to verse 27 in the Discourse of Christ, there is no other reference to this coming. There are only warnings against false prophets about it. The signs which he gives plainly refer to the destruction of Jerusalem and not to the second coming of the Lord. Surely the disciples are not urged to flee to the mountains when Jesus comes in person. Gathering of the eagles. According to Jesus' prophetic words, there would be false Christs and rumors of false Christs during the time of tribulation, but the disciples were not to be deceived. The only deliverance for Jerusalem was to be a deliverance to destruction. This is the idea in verse 28. We quote from the American Revised Version because it correctly omits the conjunction for. Wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. Carcass, meaning dead body, is figurative here for the Jewish nation which was morally, spiritually, and judicially dead. The denunciation of Christ in Matthew 23 reveals its moral and spiritual deadness, and at the conclusion of his denunciation he makes this pronouncement, "Behold, your house is left unto you desolate." As a dead body attracts vultures, so would Jerusalem, the center of the Jewish nation, attract those who would devour it. Some may be puzzled to note the term eagle being used for vulture, but in Palestine this was a common usage. Gene Stratton Porter in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia explains how this came to be. He writes, the Hebrew nesher, meaning, to tear with the beak, is almost invariably translated eagle, throughout the Bible, yet many of the most important references compel the admission that the bird to which they applied was a vulture. There were many large birds and carrion eaters flocking over Palestine, attracted by the offal from animals slaughtered for tribal feasts and continuous sacrifices. The eagle family could not be separated from the vultures by their habit of feeding, for they ate the offal from slaughter as well as the vultures. The Old Testament uses the term eagle to describe a foreign nation coming upon the Jewish nation as a punishment for sin. Moses is the first to use the term in Deuteronomy 28:49, "The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand." The term appears in Hosea 8:1 in the same sense, "He shall come as an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant, and trespassed against my law." Again it appears in Habakkuk 1:8 where its sense is obvious, "Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves, and their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far, they shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat." The picture that Christ presents us of the eagles gathering about the carcass is not difficult to perceive. It expresses the thought that a foreign army would come against Jerusalem because of its deadness in the sight of God. Christ makes this prophecy vivid because he wants it thoroughly understood on the part of the disciples that they were not to expect a personal coming nor a deliverance of Jerusalem from its just punishment. Chapter 9. Signs in the sun, moon, and stars. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not